Hey, how are you? So this episode is titled The Consequences of Keeping Your Mouth Shut. And this is going to be an exploration into the worlds of vocal shutdown, especially in relationships, and what happens when we stop saying how we feel. I will say from the outset, this is a pretty personal topic for me. I spent a lot of time bypassing hard and negative emotions and suppressing anger. And so I'm really fascinated by the process of learning to speak how you feel, get it all out. And I've really observed in my own body and in my clients the consequences of keeping our mouths shut when we've got all kinds of feelings happening down in our belly and in our chest. Before we go any further, please subscribe to my YouTube channel if you feel compelled. Click the button. So, how does this work? I'm going to explore some of the patterns and symptoms that I've observed in myself and in my clients around vocal shutdown. One of the things that's kind of incredible about this is how much tension we can develop in our jaw, especially in relation to vocal shutdown. You can even see the physical movement of a person's jaw can become restricted. It's subtle, but you can just see how much internal control is being unconsciously exercised over self-expression. You could almost say the jaw is wired shut. And because this has been going on for one's whole life, potentially, we frequently don't even notice it. And so when we get negatively triggered, the suppression patterns get activated, and it's really hard to get words out. The jaw is just one of the places that tension patterns happen. Most people that I work with feel physical constriction or activation in their throat when they get triggered. And so when the need to speak out arises, they will then feel quite a lot of activation or closing in their throat. Some people would call that the throat chakra. Others would just refer to the musculature and nervous system around that area. Tomato, whichever you like. So the throat area and vocal system is wired through the vagus nerve, which in this case is what we'd call dysregulated. And the musculature contracts, and thus the voice blocks and it closes. So as a fear or anger response is felt in the body, bam! The silencing survival strategy switches on and we close our voice. And there are many other important things taking place or happening simultaneously. So you might feel beating in the chest, and it might become hot or cold there depending on what's going on with you. Or you might have fireworks or serious activation in the solar plexus and or belly. And it's really, really useful to get to know exactly what flavors of activation are happening in your body, so it's not just happening at the mental level. Because you could say those feelings downstairs are essentially stuck in the body until they're felt, met, healed, recognized, and so on. Now, in my experience, what happens is that when I don't express myself in the moment, there's something quite significant happening in my body at the same time. I might go into what you might call a freeze response. I remember being in a work situation maybe 20 years ago, and a client shouted at me and my body just went into a freeze. And they were shouting and I was frozen, and that's what happened. I kept my mouth shut. Or rather, I didn't really have a choice because my body froze. And then, of course, in the days that followed, all the words were there. The rebuttals and argument and the boundary saying, like, you can't speak to me like that. And all the words were cycling and cycling and cycling around my head. A looping inner dialogue. And simultaneously with that, though, although I wasn't so conscious or aware of it at the time, were some pretty horrible feelings trapped in my body. Rage and resentment and anger and sadness. And so when we don't express ourselves, when we don't complete the survival response of defending ourselves, of saying what needs to be said, we can get stuck with these bad feelings and these bad looping thoughts or these looping conversations inside us. And in my experience, they create toxic, really nasty feelings in the body, like a wired solar plexus and a repeated feeling of anxiousness, resentment, and anger that can't get out, that can't extinguish itself. And I think that the result of this can be a bath of pretty negative chemicals in the body. And that we're learning that this causes disease and definitely does not feel good. And ultimately, I think what happens is that as the stuff stays inside, it begins to turn inward on us. And so while it might initially have happened in relation to somebody else, but wasn't expressed, then it starts to turn on us and we start to blame ourselves. And at some level, we feel useless or damaged. Then we can end up with all these loops of internal dialogues where we're blaming and we're arguing with other people, but simultaneously we're also blaming ourselves for this. And so the whole system starts spiraling downwards. And that's pretty hard for us. From another perspective, you could say that what happens when we keep our mouth shut is that an internal split can then develop in us, where we're seemingly completely rational and functioning normally on the top. That's the world-facing side, the one with the mask. But down inside, we have this internal dissonance where unfelt, heavy emotions are playing out. So the head is saying one thing, but the body is saying, no, 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 make it stop. Or, no, I don't feel okay with that. But that's just not coming out. We've kept our mouth shut. And so all the no's, and I disagree with what you're saying, are actually trapped in our body. We hardwire these patterns of not being able to find our no. It becomes normal to not express. And it becomes normal to have this dissonance where I seem completely reasonable on the top, but in my body there's so much going on. And my observation with this is that when people shut down their voices, then there's this bath of negativity and unexpressed stuff sitting in their being. And I believe people can get quite sick. And it might be headaches or migraines or different kinds of shutdown or IBS or any number of things happening in the belly. But it also might include lying in bed and potentially depression and shutdown and sadness, because the stuff is just stuck inside the body and can't move. Let's take a deep breath together. One conscious, loving breath. Around 10 years ago, a study presented at the Heart and Stroke Foundation's International Congress on women's health. There was a study that was written up in the online version of a major North American medical journal called Circulation. And it showed that women, that they measured over a 10-year period, they followed 1,700 women over a 10-year period. And these were all women who were unhappily married and didn't express their emotions. They found that the women that were unhappily married and didn't express their emotions were 4 times as likely to die as those women who were unhappily married and did express their emotions. In other words, the non-expression of emotion was associated with a 400% increase in the death rate. And this study was done in the US, part of a major population study. That's incredible. So keeping your mouth shut could have very serious consequences. Let's take that in. I want to move on and talk about another category of this. So, many people will have a vocal pattern of a lot of shutdown, followed by large outbursts. So long cycles of suppression and shutdown with infrequent raging outbursts, which can feel a bit like bile and vomit, all coming out at the same time. And that can have a strange result, which is on one hand relief at getting it out, but on the other hand it is rarely received. So it can lead to alienation from the person raged at and some level of shame at having been too much. And obviously on the one hand it's so important to get the stuff out. But the more one has been suppressing in between those outbursts, the more violent the outburst will likely be. Add in a trauma history and a listener or receiver who is terrified of anger, and you have a recipe for pain. And I think this pattern is a conversation for another time. And I just want to focus on the shutdown for the moment. But what I'm encouraging here is a conversation. I haven't got this all worked out, and I'd love you to share your experiences. Mail me or comment below. I think we're all working this out together. A huge component in all of this, though, is listening and the listener too. Can we create safe spaces for speaking and for listening to get to how we feel? So while we're learning to speak authentically and bravely what's really going on inside of us, most of us could also become much healthier listeners. And so learning to really sit and let people speak, let them completely speak without attaching to all of their words or fixing them or helping them, really just hearing them and allowing all the words and feelings to come out. There's a start. I think an old pattern of mine was to be very literal with what people said. So if they said a whole lot of things in the heat of an argument, I would believe that they felt all of those things, every single one. A big learning for me has been to let my partner get all of the words out, encourage her and not be fixed or attached to them. So, in this case, letting her just say it all, even the most difficult or even inaccurate or mean things, I came to understand that some people have to speak a whole lot of things out to understand how they feel. And while we want to avoid verbally abusive patterns, perhaps there's deep potential and healing and clearing and sharing, venting with each other and getting it all out. Hey, but it might need some new rules, learning to speak more truthfully and kindly, but also learning to really listen. And I think listening skills would be a whole chapter of its own, another episode. So today I just wanted to share a conversation. I'd love you to let me know how and where this lands for you. And just to say that, as you know, we're not alone in this stuff, and we're working it all out together. This is a space in which we're learning to speak, and to speak timelessly, and to speak kindly, to speak really truthfully and get stuff out and get over it. Because gosh, human life is a messy affair. And so, to finish off, I think this conversation is important. I've been coming to the conclusion over time that it might be very difficult, if not impossible, to be in healthy relationships if we don't speak what's going on inside us. When we just can't clear stuff up and we can't speak our boundaries, I think it's almost impossible to feel safe with each other as human beings. Unless we can speak how we really feel and what's okay for us and what's not, it's going to be really tough to truly connect with and trust anyone. So let's just keep exploring this together. I repeat, I'm a learner too, and we're just working this out. Thank you for sharing this time together. I hope you found some of this useful. And if you feel for it, let me know how it landed for you.